you start to understand why there's not a correlation between the views of the planning officer and the views of the applicant. The applicant wants to move quickly, I'm paying all this money, I deserve a service. But the planning officer and the planning department have heard that all before. They just need to secure money for the council, but it has no bearing on the outcome of their department. Now that is a fundamental flaw in my view, because if that department was dependent on that income or could control where that income goes, then they would very, very much definitely be interested in the outcome of that service. Whereas right now they just provide a service, it's a statutory service, they get all this income, they get paid regardless. Whereas if they were able to do that, where they were watching metrics, they were watching how long they were responding to people, they were getting decisions out on time, and they were controlling the outcome of their own budgets, the outcome of all those benefits that they're securing for the council, then I think the experience of the planning system for everyone would be a completely different thing. If you want to learn more about the planning process and how you can unlock value out of any property, click the link below to learn more. So I see a lot of comments and a lot of frustration with planning departments, as you might expect. Everyone loves to hate them, and they are the ones that get bashed the most from all people, whether it's applicants submitting an application, members of the public, members of the council, so councillors. Planning departments get an absolute bashing, and this video is kind of put together to kind of explain the situation and why it may not be as clear cut as you think. So this video mainly is centered around the big complaint that councils just want to take their money off of you. So what they do is that they will charge you a pre-app fee, and that's their way of getting income. So one of the common things that happens is when you have a site, whether you're wondering whether or not what's the possibilities of the development potential of a site through the planning process, a lot of people will suggest going down the pre-app process. Now what pre-app is effectively it's a request to the council to get planning advice on a particular scheme you have in mind. If you have a house and you want to do kind of a different style design, or you want to do something bigger, or you're testing something that you're not so sure about what the council's result might be, or maybe you just want the pre-app process just to get a smoother planning process because you might have a continuity of that planning officer, that's very common. That's what happens. So you submit pre-app, and what happens is the council will assess it just like any other application, and they will then give you advice on that. Now the key to getting good pre-app advice is making sure you submit the correct detail to give that advice. The biggest problem that people have with pre-application in particular is that there's always a line on the pre-app response from the council that says this advice is not binding on the council. Now the way to sidestep that is to submit as much detail as possible, so that any advice that the council will give will be as easy as possible to translate to that next officer if there's no continuity of that officer. Because if you have more detail up front and it's clear, then it's much easier for the next officer to pick up. If you submit something spurious, the next officer might pick it up and think, oh, that was bad advice. That generally comes from when not enough detail is submitted up front. But with that said, I just wanted to set out one of the big things that you might not know about. So one of the most common complaints about the whole system is that planning departments will ask you for a pre-app fee because it's their way of gaining income. In actual fact, I always thought that was the case. I always thought that when you submitted pre-application advice, that was income for that planning department for the general workings of that department. I know quite a few people in the industry, and obviously I talk to a lot of people that work at different councils and stuff like that. What I didn't quite realise is that every council is different for a start, but the general rule of thumb is that those planning departments do not have control over the income they generate. If you think about planning departments in general, within the wider context of a council, they have to be one of the biggest income generators for that council. Because if you want to build anything, there's a fee with that, for a planning application fee. That's just the basic planning application fee. Then if you want to get pre-app, the bigger the scheme, normally the higher the fee. So we're talking about 5 figures for pre-app fees on big sites. Then there's also things like SIL contributions. So when you get planning permission, when you add floor space to something, there's a SIL contribution that stands for Community Infrastructure Levy. And that is a black and white pounds per square metre added, which is all gained through the planning process. The other source of income, which generally is regarded for major schemes, so outline planning application schemes. Outline planning application is normally reserved for huge residential out of town sites. So what an outline plan application is, you can submit an outline planning application saying, I want to get planning permission for, let's say, 1,000 homes, and then you reserve certain matters to be assessed later. So you'll reserve, for instance, design. So what normally happens is you submit an outline application, and then you include access, which basically says, I want to build 1,000 homes, and this is the road layout that I want to use. And then that will get planning permission. Now, what normally comes with those big schemes is what's called a PPA, which is a planning performance agreement, which is basically the applicant paying the council to have a dedicated member of staff to basically pick up the phone whenever they want, and to get just basically to have a constant line of communication. And as I'm sure you know, if you've ever had experience with the planning department, having that clear line of communication is one of the biggest challenges that anyone has. So that's what a PPA is. So that's what I'm saying. So we have the planning application fee, we have the pre-app fee, which is the general advice to applicants when they want to build something. Then there's the PPA, which is an ongoing payment to the council, which assures that you get a good level of service for your scheme. And then on the back end, so when you get your decision, you have SIL contributions, which is a payment from applicants to pay for things like infrastructure. And then lastly, there's the Section 106, that is what people most commonly know. Section 106 is a legal agreement. It stands for Section 106 of a certain act, and that allows councils to secure certain benefits through that legal framework. Normally that's reserved for things like contributions to highways improvements, or contributions towards an apprenticeship scheme to employ local people. Any real contributions, things like that. Construction management plans are also controlled through that. So we're talking about a lot of money. So we're talking about, again, application fees, pre-app fees, PPA fees, SIL contributions, Section 106 contributions. And now what I've learned to realise is that generally speaking, planning departments have no control over that income. So even though they are securing all of that income, they do not have the decision, or it does not go into their budget for them to then provide that service. So what actually happens is that all of that income is generally put towards the big council pot, and then the council at a high level will say, we'll give you that. And normally, almost always, it's basically enough for the council just to keep their head above water, but really they're struggling against a constant wave of applications and pressure. So then, to put that into context, and this is not to defend officers or departments, under that framework of that understanding where there's all this pressure to raise income to ensure that the council can survive, but they don't have control over where that income goes within their own department, that is why there is such a frustration between applicants and planning officers when it comes to applicants who pay a lot of money for a service, whether it's the application fee itself, which is not cheap, whether it's a pre-app, and whether it's a PPA or SIL or Section 106. All of these fees add up to millions of pounds, but the officer doesn't get the benefit of that, or the planning department doesn't get the benefit of that. You start to understand why there's not a correlation between the views of the planning officer and the views of the applicant. The applicant wants to move quickly, I'm paying all this money, I deserve a service. But the planning officer and the planning department have heard that all before. They just need to secure money for the council, but it has no bearing on the outcome of their department. Now that is a fundamental flaw in my view, because if that department was dependent on that income or could control where that income goes, then they would very, very much definitely be interested in the outcome of that service. Whereas right now they just provide a service, it's a statutory service, they get all this income, they get paid regardless, and they're not rewarded for their efforts, good or bad. Whereas if they were able to do that, where they were watching metrics, they were watching how long they were responding to people, they were getting decisions out on time, and they were controlling the outcome of their own budgets, the outcome of all those benefits that they're securing for the council, then I think the experience of the planning system for everyone would be a completely different thing. You'd have happy applicants, you've had happy managers because they are able to control the money and they can increase the budget of their department as and when they need to, depending on big schemes that might come in. So if there's a pinch point, if a big scheme comes in, it's going to generate millions of pounds. Okay, this is coming. We need to get 2, 3, 4, 5 officers to manage it. Whereas right now there's a flat budget, and the budget pays for big pinch points, it pays for low pinch points, of which there are no low ones, by the way. There's big pinch points or slightly lower high pinch points. They just get paid at this flat level regardless, and it's not, their hard work is not reflected in anything, so they don't get paid more or whatever. The other huge thing that is not really considered is the officer themselves and the welfare of them. Now, I chose to go to work for a council because I wanted to understand what good development was, and I wanted to advance my career and understand the workings. It's only through my experience that I understand how kind of flawed the process is. But if you could restore that respect to the council, whereby they are paid just as equally as the private practices are, and there's always that conflict between officers and private consultants, by the way, it's because one side is rewarded for their high work ethic, how many applications they get through, and how much benefit they bring to their customer, and then the other side where they just get paid regardless and they get hated regardless of whatever happens, and there's no general prospect of their salary going up or they get any other benefits. So that's why there's that constant friction between the two. So with all that said, this is not a usual video. This is just me raising something that I don't think many people know about. All the money that you pay into a local planning department won't necessarily pay for a good service, because even though you're paying the council or the planning department doesn't get to choose whether or not or how it uses that income. They just get paid from a central pot within the council, and it doesn't matter either way how much you pay. The service is going to be the same, because the council is not recognising that if they pay development management that they will get higher income. One of the things I came to learn when I moved on from the development management service, which is when I was a planning officer, is that when you move away from that world, you realise that the council does not really appreciate how much hard work goes on in that council. On the applicant side, when you're submitting an application, you grumble because you're not getting a service, you're not getting decisions, you're getting an uncertainty of decision. In terms of planning, the only contact or communication or understanding of planning is what they have from a planning officer. But when you move into other areas of planning within the council, of which there are big ones like policy, like regeneration, like enforcement, there's lots of other areas. When you move away from that area, you understand that actually not many people, particularly members, don't understand how valuable the development management service is. So that's why the budgets aren't reflected in the development management service. They provide untold amounts of income. Now, maybe someone has just decided they know it's a high income level, but they just don't want to pay development management because politically, if they put money somewhere else, then it'll reap better benefits. So that's just the point I wanted to make. You might be paying a lot for the planning department, but just bear in mind that planning department doesn't control that income, and they can't do much about it at the moment. Now, every council's different. Some councils do get to control a bit of their income, but the vast majority is controlled centrally, and the planning department doesn't get a say in how that money is spent. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's a little bit enlightening. It was certainly enlightening for me when I heard about it. So if there's any more videos like this that you want to hear about, then put it in the comments below, and I'll be sure to do one about it.